And for more on this, we now cross live to SABC News correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease. Sherwin, a number of things coming out of that address over there. A strong reflection on MONUSCO and the role that MONUSCO has played over there. Very specifically, and I found this interesting, Jean-Pierre Lecroux, who is the Undersecretary General for Peace Operations, had spoken about very specifically the violation of sovereignty by the M23 rebels as being a violation of international law. It's interesting that that's being mentioned. My understanding has always been that state parties violate sovereignty. Is M23 now being considered to be a state party actor, and does that implicate Rwanda in any way whatsoever? Rwanda's, of course, yet to speak a little bit later on into this engagement.
Well, M23 is originally a breakaway of the Congolese army. So M23 per se are not violating the territorial integrity of the Democratic Republic of Congo, because these are essentially Hutu Congolese, Tutsi Congolese who fight under the banner of the rebel group M23, but supported by Rwandan Defense Force troops that are in fact violating the sovereignty. So there's a distinction between the support given to M23 by Rwandan forces, which are outside forces and therefore violating the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Congolese, but in support of a Congolese group, a breakaway faction of the Congolese army, a Tutsi group that has been based in eastern Congo. And so just to recap some of the things that Jean-Pierre Lecroux, the Undersecretary General for Peace Operations, was saying there. He says that 3 UN peacekeepers were killed. Of course, this is a fraction of the number of troops that have been killed in the DRC, the majority of whom are attached to the SAMI DRC, the SADC outfit, a number of Malawian troops, and in the main South African troops. He talked a lot about the displacement of civilians. He gave, on behalf of the Secretary General, condolences to the government of South Africa and Uruguay that have lost peacekeepers. He warned that attacks on UN blue helmets could amount to war crimes. He explained that MONUSCO was supporting SAMI DRC and the FARDC, which is the Congolese army, in its countering of the advance by M23. Of course, Goma is a city, the capital of North Kivu, that is right on the border with Rwanda. So very much a vulnerable location in terms of the effort you are seeing in support of M23 by the Rwandan Defense Force. He called on the Security Council, Oliver, to send a clear and unequivocal message to M23 and its backers, unequivocal that the Security Council here needs to produce a firm response. We then subsequently heard from the Special Representative of the Secretary General, Bintu Keita, who was speaking from Kinshasa. She also called on the council to act now. She explained that the airspace in and around Goma had now been closed. M23, she says, has expanded control in North Kivu. Reinforcements have been provided to its positions, one imagines, in the main by Rwanda's Defense Force. They have relocated non-essential personnel from Goma, but they say this is temporary based on how the situation evolves. She talked about GPS jamming and spoofing incidents that have now resumed and that hamper the protection of civilians and UN personnel, which in the main is MONUSCO's mandate. She also talked about hateful rhetoric by M23 and affiliated groups targeting herself and UN officials, human rights defenders in Congo. We must find a political solution, said Bintu Keita, called on the DRC and Rwanda to continue negotiations under the auspices of the Luanda process, which is being led. The key mediator there is Angola's President João Lourenço. She called on Rwanda to withdraw and end support for the M23, but also talked about the importance of the FARDC, which is the Congolese army, neutralizing the FDLR. The FDLR is this Hutu group in Congo, operating in Congo, that Rwanda views as genocidal. They accuse the FARDC of working alongside FDLR, and this really points to one of the central issues that is being pronounced on by Kigali. And she also, Bintu Keita, called for international arrest warrants to be issued and that the council should now take actions, including sanctions. So a very broad briefing there, but it's a complicated situation, Oliver. There are many groups involved. You have MONUSCO, the peacekeeping mission, the supporting the FARDC. They're also supporting SAMI DRC, the SADC group. Then you have the M23 being supported by Rwandan Defense Force. in an environment where there are many other rebel groups operating in eastern Congo, including the ADF. So it's a very complicated situation. We're talking here about capacity of the SANDF force, real questions about military intelligence in the region, why this attack and the expansive nature of it wasn't identified earlier, why South Africa's Defense Minister Angie Motshekga was in the region as this attack was unfolding. So lots of unanswered questions here, and we're just getting peripheral stuff here in terms of where we go in the days ahead.
Given that Bintu Keita had spoken about the consideration of sanctions this time around towards the end of her address right now, the last time the DRC appeared before the United Nations Security Council, it had very specifically asked and called for sanctions targeted against Felix Tshisekedi, the president of, Felix Tshisekedi had called for sanctions against the president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame. Would those then take priority in the next addresses to come thereafter, given that a non-state actor in this instance, Bintu Keita, had said, look, we might have to consider this?
Yeah, the complication in the UN Security Council is that it's often very difficult to reach consensus around sanctions in particular. There are certain countries within that council, dynamic Russia and China in the main, that are averse to imposing sanctions. The question is, the M23 is a non-state actor. Will there be a greater, a deal of consensus being able to be reached in this council that, its first preference is never really to impose sanctions? So the French ambassador spoke to reporters just before this council, and France is the pen holder on statements and resolutions as it relates to the DRC file in the council. And I asked him specifically, based on the verified information from the UN panel of experts that monitors the situation in the DRC, statements from the US State Department, and statements from the DRC itself that has pointed the finger consistently now at Rwanda's involvement in backing the M23, whether it was time for the council to take a firmer hand against Kigali. And his response to me was, yes, they are now working on a statement where he, quote, said, we'll call a cat, essentially saying we'll call a spade a spade. And so one expects a firmer response here in naming Rwanda in any future statement that is agreed to by this council. But certainly a long-standing gripe to which you are pointing out, the DRC has consistently now for years pointed the finger at Rwandan influence, has called for sanctions, but that has not happened yet. Because why? Rwanda is a key member of the United Nations. It is a key troop contributor to various peacekeeping missions around the world. So it's a tricky political conversation that needs to happen. And I think the preference now is going to be that the AU-led process by Angola's President João Lourenço leads this process to some sort of political off-ramp. But you're absolutely right. The DRC has for the longest time been pointing the finger at Rwanda. But Rwanda, of course, on the record, has denied its involvement. I'm not quite sure how the Rwandan ambassador will frame what is already known to be true. But remember also, Oliver, there's a broader conversation happening here. Felix Tshisekedi in the UN Security Council in September of 2023 called for the gradual withdrawal of MONUSCO from the DRC territory, essentially asking for this mission, this long-standing mission in Congo, to be wound up. And what you're seeing is you saw a withdrawal from South Kivu, and just north of South Kivu, now in North Kivu around Goma, you are seeing an escalation here. So the question about when this MONUSCO mission essentially withdraws is an open-ended one now, given the escalation we're seeing here. So a very complex situation. They wanted the UN to leave. It's not clear when that will happen, and it's certainly not clear when that will happen, given the escalation we're seeing around Goma right now.
Sherwin Bryce-Pease, thank you so much for that. We'll keep a close eye on further engagements taking place at the United Nations Security Council, France being at the podium right now, delivering its address as the pen holder. And of course, following France will be Sierra Leone, the United States, Greece, Slovenia, United Kingdom, Denmark, China, Pakistan, the Russian Federation, Panama, and the Republic of Congo, before we hear responses from the DRC as well as Rwanda.